All right, I just wanted to go over a few things. I'm way behind on emails, so it's just easier for me to answer like thousands of people with one video lesson. These are the final 2 days, the 29th and 30th of April 2014, to lock in 40 to 60% savings on the newsletters and on the DVDs. In 2 weeks, my newsletter prices will be rising because I want to weed out students who just aren't serious. And 90% of the questions I get are from students who are not serious, and they waste my time because they don't watch the DVDs, they don't watch the video lessons, and they're paying me the least because they think that success comes from hot stock picks only. And that's not true. It comes down to having a strategy, knowing it dead on, and executing the strategy with the rules, with the risk management in place, and understanding the patterns. And all of my most dedicated students are doing that. And I want more dedicated students. So I'm cutting the fat, as it were. And we're going to raise prices. Existing subscribers, you're locked in for life. Will be the final sale. So if you take advantage of this sale, you're locked into these sale savings for life. I have to focus on the most dedicated students. I want to create more millionaire students. I have two so far officially, Tim Grittani, Michael Good. Tim Grittani is up to 1.72 million now in profits in 3 years and 2 months since becoming my student. Michael Good is at 1.3 million. Also have two other students who are unofficially millionaires. I can't use their name publicly, but they have each crossed $1 million in profits. So I have a few millionaire students, but I want more. And ideally, if you do make $1 million with my strategy, you'll be nice enough to let me use your name and story, because it's inspirational to a ton of people out there who don't think that it's possible to turn a few thousand into a few million. I did it a while ago. Now my students are doing it. That's all I want. That's why I wake up every morning. As I said, I spoke at Harvard the other day. And as I said, this guy was cool. He had my same watch and some other students. This guy just started. Awesome questions. I spoke to this room at Harvard, and I told them, and actually, I think it was that last guy in that photo who asked me a question. Why do I get up every morning? And once you make enough money, yeah, I'm making more money trading. I'm up nearly 550,000 now in the first 4 months of 2014, 107%. It's one of my best starts to the years ever. In the past week, I had 2 dead-on calls, shorting ARTX at 450 before it went to like the low threes, and buying VDSI in the low nines before it went to 11. Just a day. Both of them, it took, well, actually ARTX took like 2 days or 3 days to go down all the way. VDSI was dead on with the earnings, but both classic patterns that I teach. And my making, what did I make? I made 16 grand on ARTX and like 7 grand on VDSI. So I made 23 grand. That's nice, but it's not going to change my life one bit. And the coolest thing was getting, hundreds of emails from people saying, "Oh my God, this stuff works." And I know a lot of you guys don't believe me. There's people on the internet and they're like, "Oh, I'll make you rich." Well, I actually do it, and I work my ass off. You can ask my girlfriend. She doesn't like how much I work. I don't like how much I work, but there's a job that needs to be done, and my job is never over. So I have to keep making video lessons and trades and watch lists and giving webinars and doing whatever I can to help you understand. I wrote a blog post yesterday about, failure, and that was very well received. And that took me like 3 hours to write. It was nearly 3,000 words. Let's talk about the markets for a second. Here is a 10-year chart of the NASDAQ. We are way up. I don't think you guys realize, we tripled, okay? We tripled in 5 years. And a lot of people are newbies. You have a lot of, newly rich marijuana investors, and they think that, oh, marijuana, let's just buy long term. And they have that accent too. And you've gotten rich in a very, very easy market. Now let's see what you do in a not so easy market. Will this be a big bear market? Possibly. Let's look at the Russell 2000. This is smaller stocks, and these have gone up even more. You have a nearly quadruple off the lows and no real support for another 20% lower. So I would love a crash. I would love consolidation. I'm not going to write a post saying a crash is coming. I'm not one of those market commentators who wants to get attention that way. I don't know if a crash is coming. I don't know if this is just consolidation, but I know that there aren't as many plays as there were a few weeks ago, and that's good. That's healthy for the market. You need less plays, because for me to be up, 500,000 in just a few months, one of my students, Greg, is up over 5 million this year in 2014 in 4 months. Tim Grattani, I think he's up like 700,000. We are all just doing very well. And you have to kind of put that into perspective when the markets are up this much. So I'm playing it very cautiously, as you see in my trading and in my commentary. And I encourage you to do the same, because I don't want you guys losing your profits. Sadly, a lot of the wolf pack and marijuana investors did not listen to me before their stocks crashed 50, 75, 90%. And they're like, oh, Tim's just a grumpy short seller. No, I'm actually a wise fucking trader. And I've seen these patterns play out year in, year out for 15 years. And I'm not saying I'm all knowing. I haven't been trading for 30 or 40 or 50 years. I'm not even that old. But I have seen various markets, and I know when to pull back and when to exercise caution. So that is the time right now. But this is the biggest thing right now for the next 2 days. I know I'm going to get a ton of people on May 1st, May 2nd. Can you just extend the sale 1 or 2 more days? No. Okay? If you can't make a 2-day deadline to lock in, newsletter savings for life, then you're probably not going to be a dedicated student anyways, because you're probably a screw up. I have a lot of students. I have a lot of subscribers. I'm grateful for every single one of them. But I also want to focus on those of you who are competent, those of you who are dedicated, because I want more millionaires. I don't want people who, have class or work or girlfriends or boyfriends or husbands or wives or kids or pets or travel, and you make excuses that any of that stuff, prevents you from learning and prevents you from trading and making money. And that's just not true, because I have all of that stuff. I have probably the busiest schedule out of anybody, and I make time for trading, and I make time for doing all of my educational tools that we're creating. So if I can make time, you can make time. All you have to do is listen. You don't have to come up with ideas and everything. You just have to listen from somebody who is trying to help you. I'm on your team, okay? I'm not one of these newsletters, as I talked about in the blog post. I don't want to just keep you in the dark so that you're a newsletter subscriber forever. I love the fact that, several of my top students don't need my alerts anymore. They still watch like the watch list, because they know that I'm researching every single night for potential stocks in play. But they don't necessarily need to follow the alerts. They don't necessarily need to watch the video lessons. I want you to become self-sufficient. And that goes against my industry of stock picking newsletters, where they don't teach you everything they know, and they don't want you to become self-sufficient, because then they lose a customer over time. And I don't care. Again, I don't want the most number of customers. I want the highest quality students. And that involves you becoming self-sufficient, and it involves you becoming fucking rich, so that you can brag about your gains, or I can brag about your gains, because I have an upcoming book and an upcoming TV show, and I want more testimonials. Testimonials drives business, and when you make money, guess what? You tend to talk about it, because it's pretty freaking crazy that people like Tim Grattani started with $1,500 of his own money just a little over 3 years ago. One of my students in Tajikistan, Azimjan, started with $2,200. Now he's up to $202,000. When I started with a few $1,000s and made millions, I was talking about it too. I have a big mouth, as you can tell. So I want you talking about it, because this is good for everybody. The more people trading penny stocks, long and short, whether you want to trade for an hour or trade for a day or or swing trade for many days or weeks, it brings more volume. It brings more people to the game. And as hard as I teach, I'm reaching less than 0.00001% of people out there, because most people just want to invest in penny stocks, and they think that they're just going to be like, oh, let me just invest in them like a lotto ticket, and they don't pay attention to any of the patterns that I trade. They don't pay attention to historical norms, so they sometimes they get lucky with the marijuana stocks and they make a ton of money, but then they lose it all because they go down with the ship because they're not meticulous and they don't follow rules. I was talking to one guy. I'll leave you with one more story, but it's very relevant because I was talking with somebody right after my Harvard speech, and they're like, yeah, I want to get started, and I've heard this a million times. Everybody wants to get started. Where do I start? What brokers? And they say it kind of out of interest. They want my life. They want the money. They hear about Tim Grittani and Michael Good and Azim John and my success, and they think, oh, maybe it's them. But then, they only study for 5, 10, 15 hours max, and then they're like, it's not for me. What I do is I'm like a driving instructor, okay? Everything I do, everything I teach is very front end loaded. And, driving is very scary when you first get started, right? If you're 15, 16 years old and you get into the car and your dad is trying to teach you, or a professional driving instructor is trying to teach you things, you're nervous because you don't know what's going on. But at least you're taught to obey, stop signs and red lights and stuff like that. And that way it's not as scary. You do it a few times, you do it a few hundred times, a few thousand times, and then driving becomes second nature. That's very, very similar to what trading in the stock market is when you have the right rules in place, the right, traffic signs, for lack of a better analogy. That's what I do. I teach you stop signs. I teach you red lights and green lights and when to go fast and when to go slow and safety measures and stuff like that. And if you don't trade with rules, the stock market can be very scary, and it's just as dangerous. If you blow through red lights and stop signs and you don't stay in your lane, you're going to die in a fiery car crash very quickly. Very, very similar to the stock market, where if you don't pay attention to everything that I teach, your account will die. And that's sad, because 90 to 95% of traders lose money. They blame penny stocks. They blame the stock market. They say that it's tough. They say that it's confusing. And that's just not true. It's because they don't study enough. And in the blog post I wrote yesterday about failure, I said, look, give me 100 hours. I understand that's a lot in today's world. We're in this just content consumption society where, okay, even a 3-hour movie is too long. But if you give me 100 hours to teach you an art, to master an art that will change your life, as it has, now hundreds of my students, because I mentioned these millionaire students, but I also have dozens of students who are earning 6 figures a year and hundreds of students who are earning 5 figures a year. It's not just about 0 or a million. This isn't a casino. There's a lot of success that you can have, and even if some people aren't trading yet, you're at least learning. But if you can give me 100 hours, I will teach you everything that I know, all of the rules, all of the lessons, all of the patterns, so that you're safe, so that you don't make boneheaded mistakes, because I was self-taught, unfortunately. It was good because it made me very independent, but I wish I had had a mentor when I first started, and I never did, ever. I am literally writing the rule book here with this penny stock trading, and yeah, I've turned 12,000 now into nearly 4 million, but I probably could be at like 6 or 8 or maybe even 10 or 12 million if I had had guidance from the beginning and not made so many boneheaded mistakes. And I probably would have done better on every single trade for the first, I'd say 5 or 6 or even 7 years, maybe even 10 years. I'm getting better now that I see what works, and I'm getting better as a teacher too. But I want to cut your learning time down, and I want to cut the time it takes for you to grow your account down so that you can grow your account exponentially. So anyways, that's my spiel for today. Trade conservatively. Please, please take me up on this sale, this annual newsletter sale and DVD sale in the next 2 days. You're not going to have another chance. Save now, learn now, and enjoy the profits and wisdom. Thank you.